Welcome to my messy library. Let's talk about books. Today, I'm here to give you a preview of what I plan to read in October, as well as wrapping up everything I finished up in September, so we can talk about all of the great things going on in the spooky season. October is one of my very favorite months of the year. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, it is the best weather we get, hands down, all year long. The leaves are falling, there's a nice cool breeze, but it's not freezing cold yet, and that is my very favorite time of year. It's also when we get to celebrate the spooky season. Pumpkins, falling leaves, spooky ghost stories, bonfires, all of those things are great. And as someone who has loved horror for as long as she's been reading, I have always waited for October to read some of my favorite upcoming spooky novels, or hopefully favorite upcoming spooky novels. And I am so excited to get started and to share my list with you guys, because I want to always be able to give awesome recommendations for really good horror novels, especially really good female authored horror novels. Those are really important because they don't get as much attention, in my opinion. So I am so excited to share my October TBR, also wrap up everything I read in September, and to share all of my ideas for what I plan to do this month. To start out this month, I read a police procedural style detective story. I was really into that vibe at the end of August and into the beginning of September. So I read a story called Her Final Words by Brianna Labuskes, I believe is how you say that. I really enjoyed this story. I actually listened to it mostly on Audible. It was through Kindle Unlimited and an Audible whisper sync type story. So I really enjoyed listening to it. I think I gave it around 3.5 to 4 stars. Overall, the story kind of was a little predictable, but that's okay. Sometimes you want something that feels really familiar while you're reading. I love the cultish aspect of the story. I've always been really interested in the mentality behind religious organizations, especially like the cultier, a little scarier side of religious organizations. So that was a big focus of this story and something I really enjoyed. The second book I read in September was called The Book of Accidents by Chuck Wendig. A lot of people have been talking about this book, and there's a lot of huge booktubers who are planning on reading it really soon, especially for spooky season, because this story is definitely one with some tension and some really creepy concepts. I really loved this book. For an almost 600-page tome of a book, I read it in, I think, 4 days, and that is crazy for me. I don't usually read quite that fast, so I highly recommend that for someone who's looking to build a shelf for spooky season. Definitely check out this book. I actually got that book from my library. I love supporting a local library and checking out any books that I think are going to be great, and definitely continuing to recommend them. So check it out. Get it from your local library. I also have it on Kindle. It's a great story, and I highly recommend it. Next up, I listened to Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism by Amanda Montell. This story, again, kind of goes back to what I was talking about with Her Final Words. It was a language exploration of the past of the word cult and the ways that it's used today, and the different things that we colloquially, especially Americans, use the word cult to describe. I found it super interesting, especially as something that I could listen to. I found the narration really informative and had a great speed, and I used it to get through doing household chores, a lot of those throughout this month. This story is definitely highly recommended, this nonfiction. I highly recommend this nonfiction, especially if you like to listen. I tend to pick a singular nonfiction every month that I plan to listen to, and that is the one I picked for September. I really enjoyed it and highly recommend. Next up is a booktube favorite, The Breach of Peace by Daniel Green. As someone who's just now getting back into the swing of reading fantasy, I really enjoyed this little novella to get me started on the path of more modern fantasy. I loved the storyline. I thought the characters were really interesting. I really was interested in the fact that the main characters of the novella were a married couple. You don't see that a lot, and I really enjoy that angle, and I tend to write from that angle a lot. So I love that exploration, and overall the book was really great, and it was a quick read, under 100 pages. I highly recommend you pick it up. And finally, the last book I read in September, The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I was really excited to start this story and to start this whole series. I mean, 14 and a half, if you call a prequel a half, books written over however many years. This is an epic, and it is epic in both the book sense and in the fandom sense. So many people love these stories, and so many people are hyped up about the Amazon Prime show. I am also so hyped up after reading this book. I have a couple of other friends who are reading it right now, as well as several booktubers that I follow doing read-throughs in the last year or two. So I really was so excited to start this story this year. But when the show's trailer came out, that was the final sort of kick to get me to buy the book and actually get started. As you can see, I bought the mass market paperback and I basically destroyed it. So I really enjoyed it. I read it in about a week and a half to 2 weeks. There were a couple times where the pacing was a little bit slower than I would have preferred, but that's okay. I had that same thought with Tolkien, and after I finished it, I wanted it to have lasted twice as long. And I have a feeling I'm going to feel that way about this series too. I could not even wait another second after I finished this, and I started the second book right away. So that'll be in my TBR section of this video. So overall, I gave The Eye of the World probably 4.5 stars if Goodreads had half stars, but they don't. I probably gave it about 4.5 stars. I think, again, the pacing was a little bit wonky in spots, and there's some things I could have done with a little less description of, but every person who has read this book is probably going to tell you the same thing, and that's okay. Really no complaints. Like I said, I couldn't wait to read the second book, and already I'm having an even more fun time reading the second book. So highly recommend, especially if you are interested in what you've seen with the trailer of the show. It's really exciting to kind of read it and to know that I'll have all the information going in. I plan to read the first 3 in September, October, and November, hopefully finishing before November 19th when the show comes out. So now that we've covered everything I read in September, let's talk about my October TBR. First up is the book we've already talked about. I have already started, as you can see with my bookmark here, I've already started The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. This is the second book in the Wheel of Time series, and I was super excited to start this. I had planned on waiting and putting a couple of books in between, but I just had to get started. So I will likely be reading this book kind of off and on throughout the month, depending on kind of the pacing. But my plan is to have it done sort of mid-month to allow me lots of time to read the rest of the books on this list. So like I mentioned in the September portion of this, I tend to pick a nonfiction audiobook that I'll listen to throughout the month while I do things like chores around the house, while I take walks around my neighborhood, and also while I'm doing work that doesn't require like intense thought. This month I chose Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women That the Movement Forgot. This nonfiction book has been recommended in lots of circles in my life in the last, I think, 2 years since it came out. I'm always trying to get better and get more informed about the dynamics of sexism and racism and the ways that I, as a woman, can be better towards other women of all races, and how I can teach my daughter to also be a better woman. So I'm expecting a lot of thought-provoking stuff to come out of this, and I'm hoping that all of the reviews I've heard will ring true with me as well. Now that we've gotten through the sort of fantasy read-through that's going to go throughout the rest of probably the next few years, and my nonfiction pick for the month, we have my favorite part of the year, spooky season reads. So there are a couple of things that are really important to me. One is reading horror novels in October because it's the best time of year for them, and it's the atmosphere and the temperature, everything kind of lines up, especially in this northern hemisphere area that I live in. So I'm really excited to talk about the horror books that I plan to read this month. The first being Mine by Delilah S. Dawson. This is a middle grade about a girl who is sort of a drama queen and moves from her school to another school, and she is kind of haunted in the house that they move into. Really excited about this one. I love to read middle grade horror because I loved reading horror at this age, and I love to be able to recommend good horror to younger kids. It doesn't feel like a lot of people talk about good middle grade horror, but it's something that I would have loved to have had more of as a kid, and I want to always promote it when I get a chance. So there are a couple that I'll be reading this month. The other is actually 13s. This is by Kate Alice Marshall. This novel is about a group of friends who are trying to defeat a mystical paranormal entity that's coming for them. This was a book that came out last year, and I was really excited to read it then, but it just didn't quite make my list. So I'm definitely going to read it this year. Again, I love reading any middle grade horror because I wish I'd had more as a kid, and I love reading female horror authors because there's not nearly enough of them and they're not talked about enough in my opinion. So these are definitely two I plan to get to first thing this month in the spooky season to kind of light up the mood, especially because they're pretty quick reads for me, and also that way I can likely donate these copies to a school, a teacher, someone who I think will get use out of them for kids in the intended age range. Next up is one of my favorite horror authors, at least modern horror authors, is Stephen Graham Jones's My Heart is a Chainsaw. So this has gotten a couple of mixed reviews from some people that I generally agree with, so I'm a little trepidatious walking in, especially because it's got a lot of content. There's a lot of pages in this book, but I'm pretty excited about it because generally Jones's writing is really fast-paced and something that I'm generally really interested in his characters. And I also love his representation of Native American voices and reservation life and things like that, things that I don't have any experience with. And I'd love to be able to learn through his writing and through his social media posts and everything. So I'm really excited to read this, and I'm definitely hoping that this will be a high star book. Next up, we have The Last House on Needless Street by Catronia Ward. Now this book has been all over all of my social media feeds. One of the perspectives is from a cat, which is very exciting to me as a cat owner and a cat lover. I am so excited to see what it's like to read a scary story from the perspective of a cat. But in general, it's about a spooky abandoned house with a couple of people living in it and kind of things that go down in that. I've heard really great reviews from everyone from Stephen King to booktubers that I follow and people on like book Instagram. So I'm really excited to see what this is going to bring, and this might be my first read of the month because I'm really excited about it. So it might be what I dive my feet into on a nice Friday night with a cup of tea. And the last up is one that might not be spooky, but is likely going to have a lot of tension, and that is When Ghosts Come Home by Wiley Cash. Now, I've read, I think, everything that Wiley Cash has written. Wiley Cash was actually a professor at the college that I went to the year before I got there, and as someone who always loved writing, I had heard all the stories about this author who went on to become, book famous after he left. So I immediately sought out his work and I really enjoy it. I love the sort of Southern Gothic vibes and generally the family stories that he tells. So I'm really excited to get into this one. I'm not super familiar with the synopsis, but I do that on purpose because I really like to go into a book a little bit blind. I like to follow a path as opposed to sort of having a preconceived idea about how a book's going to go. So I'm really excited to read this one, and I think I recommend everyone picking up Cash's other works, and I cannot wait to see what this is like this month. Now that we've talked about everything I plan to read this month, I want to talk about the other content coming to this channel. So this is the first video that you're going to see on my messy library, my channel. This channel is going to be all about my books. It's going to be all about my writing process, and it's going to be all about the literary world. I'll likely talk a little bit about book news, new releases coming from authors that I really enjoy and authors that I've heard great things about, great book covers, news of adaptations, and my review of the Wheel of Time books is definitely going to be here because I would love to talk to more people about what they think about the Wheel of Time, and I love to hear, people who've read the whole series kind of joke about like theories that people have about the books. So those are the types of content you're going to find here. Another thing that I'm very soon going to be releasing is my Preptober plans. So every year I write for NaNoWriMo. I've been doing this for at least 10 years, if not more. I think I was in high school when I started NaNoWriMo, like early high school. So I've been doing NaNoWriMo for a very long time, and I've won a few times, not all of them for sure, but I'm definitely getting ready to start my prep for NaNoWriMo, and I am going to document the whole process this year on this channel. So my Preptober schedule is going to be split up into 4 sections. First, I'm going to plan the story theme, the world, the setting, and then the characters. That's going to be the first 2 weeks of October. I'll be doing character sheets and reading books about character and building character and plot. Especially this year, I am planning to write a romance, which is not something that I've written much in the past. So I have a lot of research to do about romance beats and kind of story structure. I know what I want to tell, but I have to figure out how I'm going to tell it. So that's going to be a big focus of the first part of the month. On the second half of the month, I'm going to be focusing on building the beginning, middle, and end of my plot. So that's going to be the sort of more intense section. I actually have a couple of books about plot and books about building a really good plot, because that's something that I've found a lot of my issues with writing are around finishing the story and sort of finalizing what happens and closing the story off really well. So I will be working through doing a full plan in Preptober of my novel, and I will be notating all of that here in weekly videos about Preptober. But I will have a whole separate video about my NaNoWriMo story, my writing story, and everything I plan to do in October. I am so excited that you decided to join me today. You can follow me on Goodreads if you want to keep track of the books that I'm reading, my progress, and my thoughts as my reviews come out throughout the month. If you would like to see more content on this channel, please subscribe, hit the like button, let me know. Please comment below if you're going to read any of these books, or if you have read any of these books, if you have thoughts on the Wheel of Time read through that I'm doing. I would love to hear anything, and I would love to engage with you in the comments. That's really the reason that I'm starting this channel, is to talk to more people about the books I'm reading and to open doors around reading and writing. So I'm hoping that I can meet people that have similar thoughts as I do, and I'm really excited to jump right in, and I cannot wait to get started. So I hope everyone has a really great start to their October, and I'll see you soon.